The player in the slot obeys Cubell. We'll get it back. The shot, Morin, they score! They score! Morin fires! And if it's his first NHL goal to give the Flyers a 2-1 lead. How about that?
Well, what a great moment for Sam Morin. You see the reaction of his teammates. That was awesome. He gets the shot through. Michael Raffl buying time, allowing O&B Puckcast to get in on it. And the shot from Morin. And the smiles from his teammates. Just absolutely awesome moment for Sam, who's been an outstanding player in this game. There's Raffl. There's the turnover by Rooney, and O&B Puckcast quickly gets it to the point. Sam Morin snaps it home right there. Look at that reaction. Gostisbehere into his arms. Huge goal for the Flyers and a big moment for Sam Morin.
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah, and I'm here with Chef B, who's going to tell us about one of our sponsors here. Chef?
Yeah, O&B Puckcast is now brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. The winter months can be especially hard on our homes, from roof damage and peeling siding to frozen pipes and toilet overflows. Call Summit Public Adjusters before you call your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be stressful and confusing. Let Summit Public Adjusters take the stress out of the claim process by having our guys work for you. Get the most for your money and your repairs. The next time the big snow or the rain leaves you with some home damage, contact us for a free consultation. Summit Public Adjusters are licensed in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Learn more at summitpublicadjusters.com or call 215-752-0560. Just tell them that the chef sent you.
Yeah, what was that number again, Chef?
215-752-0560.
That's terrific. All right, we're going to carry on with the rest of our show. And we are back. This is Isaiah as FlyersNittyGritty.com presents the O&B Puckcast episode 111. And I am here with Chef B and the great Dan Silver. And I just wanted to introduce our guest. He's with us right away. He's been with us before. You know him from Snow The Goalie podcast and CrossingBroad.com. Russ Joy. How you doing, man?
I'm great. I appreciate you having me back on. It's been a few months. I think a little bit has happened since the end of October.
Boy, tell me about it. So there's so many places we could go since our last show. I've made a couple of appearances on some other podcasts, and I think people have the measure of my opinion. But before we get into the Flyers and their ineptitude, notwithstanding what happened yesterday, we got to talk about the best story of the season. Obviously, it's Sam Morin getting his first NHL goal and actually playing well, not only with the eye test, the advanced metrics, and the Flyers break a skid there and grab a 2-1 victory. But I think, like I said, the larger story, Russ, is the perseverance of Sam Morin and just the joy throughout the organization, and I think the fans as well, with the success of yesterday.
You want to talk about joy? Who better to bring on than the guy who has it in his name?
Correct.
So, Sam is a very interesting case study in perseverance, heart, and determination, and having the right disposition that really captures the hearts and minds of an organization. This is a guy who, 2 torn up knees later, 2 knee surgeries later, that could have ended his career, never gave up, considered it, but never gave up. And then here he is with the season in an absolute tailspin. He kind of helps pull the nose up, at least temporarily, and says that it's the happiest moment, the greatest moment of his life. that he found the back of the net and that he was able to contribute in that way, given where the team is at and how the team has been playing. There's another guy I felt good for in that moment, was Shane Gostisbehere, because the lasting images that came out of that moment, the stills, you've got Gostisbehere just elated, jumping into the arms of Big Sam. And I actually felt good for him because Shane Gostisbehere, a game before that, gave the most honest interpretation of what was going on with this team leading into that game. And sometimes you get rewarded for being honest. And he got to be on the ice for that play. He and Big Sam as a pairing, solid enough. Got the job done in that game. But Sam Morin, man, like you can't help but feel good for the kid. And it's great to see things, work out to, for somebody who's a good human being and who so many people in the organization have rooted for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're talking about a number one draft pick from 2013. Here we are in 2021. And that was his 15th game. And it's been a long road for him. And he had a core injury on top of the knees. The Chef.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question. Now, for the naysayers out there, and there are some of them, you can hear some of them, well, it's just one game. Is Big Sam, is he really that much better than what we've had out there? Is he going to be, can he sustain it? I mean, you think, did it just look better because the current defense was so bad?
Well, I think it's a lot of different things, right? It's a combo of a lot. I mean, Nate Prosser also scored in his first game in however many years. So I don't want like people to get too high on the expectations, but I think like you can let a moment kind of live in its own little mini echo chamber or something. It can be its own little time capsule, and we can enjoy that moment for what it is. I don't know. I mean, I would like to think that conceptually Sam Morin is better than Erik Gustafsson. I mean, at least defensively, he has to be, right? It can't be any worse at even strength. He's a big body. I mean, you've needed physicality. You've talked about, if you're Alain Vigneault, you've talked about needing physicality and needing big bodies on the ice since the Islanders series. I think even going back to the Montreal series. Mm-hmm. The whole reason that they even experimented with Sam as a winger was specifically so they would have some kind of size on the ice. They wanted to have a deterrent to, stop opposing teams from running a Joel Farabee or an Oscar Lindblom or taking a cheap shot on Claude Giroux. And so, like, on one level, you're really excited about it because it's a big moment and it's a highlight reel moment. The flip side to it, of course, is that in this year where the defensive core has been absolute garbage, like has been a dumpster fire, like if you'd even gotten relatively decent play from this defensive core, you wouldn't be talking about a team that had fallen to sixth place. You wouldn't be talking about a team that, despite having games in hand, looked like the gap was getting even farther and farther apart between, them and the top tier of this division. And Sam Morin couldn't get on the ice. Now, is that a bad evaluation by Chuck Fletcher? Is that a bad evaluation by Alain Vigneault? Is that, they spend so much time trying to convert this kid that, once Scott Gordon made the decision that, they didn't have enough depth with the Phantoms that he had to move him back. Like, is that the thing that sets it all up? Like, I don't know. I don't know who's to blame. And honestly, we'll find out here if Sam ends up playing the next few games and we see how he does. If he's at least competent as a third pair defenseman, then I think it's going to look bad on the organization that they didn't give him this shot, or maybe it's going to look bad on him that he didn't, quote unquote, earn that opportunity sooner. I don't know. I mean, that's why I said, like, I think if nothing else, like, we should just be happy for the kid that he got to have this moment. But I don't know. This is a very long way to just say that, like, there's a lot of uncertainty, and I would like to think that he's going to be able to contribute to this team as a third pair defenseman. It certainly can't be worse than Nate Prosser or even Erik Gustafsson. It just can't be.
No, I agree. I mean, he's got a lot of adrenaline in there. We'll see what happens when that drains out, Dan.
Yeah, I just want to talk about Sam Morin for a little bit because, I think it's been, first of all, I think there was one decision back in 2017 that kind of like started this entire, I'll call it a death spiral, even though now it's taken this great upward turn, is that, back in 2017, there were was it 3 Flyers young rookie defensemen battling for a spot in camp. It was Haig, Sanheim, and Morin. And to me, it was a no-brainer that Morin, Sanheim were the 2 guys. And of course, Ron Hextall decided, and Hextall, that Haig was actually the only no-brainer of the 3, and that, the next spot was going to be between Sanheim and Morin. Sanheim got it. They sent Morin down. He tore up his knee, rehabbed it, came back, tore up his knee. Now he's back again. It's like this story, and you've got this kid who I thought should have made the team in 2017, didn't, and then just goes on this, has these horrible knee injuries back to back, and it's just such a great story because he just keeps rehabbing it. He stayed in the area to rehab it. Like, you can just tell how much he loves playing hockey. And it's when he scored that goal, I'm not going to lie, like, I started crying. Like, it was unbelievable. Then you watch him after the game talk about how it's the best moment of his life. I mean, could you imagine some of the other guys on this team saying that? And I think that's why this moment hits so hard for like a lot of fans and even the guys on the team, is because this guy cares so much. And not only that, but here's the thing. No one is going to argue that Sam Morin is ever going to be a top pair NHL defenseman or probably even a second pair NHL defenseman. But the whole argument is about, can he be a steady, relevant third pair NHL defenseman? And for me, the answer has always been yes, he definitely can. And then especially since you look at this year's team, and one of their biggest issues is how soft they are. So you could get a guy like Sam Morin on the third pair playing 14, 15 minutes a game. When he's out there, he's going to be hitting people. He's going to be fighting people. He's obviously not going to score a whole lot of goals. It was great to see him score the goal, but like, to me, his story is like the opposite of what we've seen from the Flyers this year, which is just getting pummeled, not showing any heart. And, they're down 9-0 against the Rangers last week or 2 weeks ago. And I think they threw like 1 or 2 hits the entire third period. Like, show something, show that you care. And to me, Sam Morin always shows that he cares, and he plays a way that they need someone to play. So for me, it's like a no-brainer. Like, let's see what he can do on the third pair. But it's just such a great story.
It is a great story. And you look at what the Flyers have been over the last little bit. I think they had, going into yesterday's game, they were 4-9-1 for March. And you have Justin Braun coming out, Russ, and talking about how the team gets in their own head. They're very fragile, and they just start digging deeper holes. And it brings us back, in my mind anyway, to like, hey, wait a minute. Well, stop the clock here. Well, we've been building this thing since 2014 with Ron Hextall. Chuck Fletcher comes in to accelerate this process and bring it to, another level. And here we are. And that's what I consider an inflection point in their tenure right now.
I mean, so there are a few things. First of all, Dan, it's interesting that you note somebody trying to rehab who stayed local and showed heart. I can't imagine that there's anybody who's the exact opposite of that who happens to be on this team still. Weird. So
inquiring minds want to know.
Yeah. So there is one thing that I went back because some of the comments that have been coming up lately took me back to like something that I remembered writing. I think 2 years. It was 2 years ago, and it was about the locker room being kind of this like fractured place, and that kind of narrative popped up again this week. And I went back and I like reread the thing that I wrote, and it was mostly that it's hard right now to talk about the dynamics of a team when you're not in the locker room. And some people are of the opinion that like relying on that is kind of lazy, but it's not, because there are certain kind of like human element things to seeing how a team reacts after a win and after a loss, body language, interactions, who's near who never seems to be around one another, who's pumping up the other one as like they're about to go talk to the media. There are like just certain human element things that you miss by not being in the locker room. And one of the things that I noticed 2 years ago is that it felt like nonstop the young guys were being trotted out to answer the questions that the vets just simply didn't want to have to answer. And we would get stood up all the time by vets on the team, specifically Claude Giroux. And to me, that just spoke of discord. And that was obviously like the year from hell, right? Like that was the Hextall and the Hackstall year. It was a total mess. And what I think you started to see, at least in public comments, you talk about the comment of it being, a fragile group. The thing that I wrote 2 years ago, like Jake Voracek just, he said after a game against the Senators that they lost, that the team got scared, that they were in that situation so many times. We got scared. We have young guys, but we also have older guys. We're thinking too much right now, which is hurting us. I mean, if I had taken that article and changed a couple of names on it, I could have just put it back out again this year. And so, this is where I come back to that. Like, Sam Morin moment is great. Let's let it live in its own little thing. But, that doesn't change the trajectory of their season. If it does, if that ends up becoming the pivot point that, this team goes from an absolute dumpster fire to, somehow Big Sam's goal just, fundamentally shifts their season, then cool. Have me back on, and I will eat all the crow in the world for it. But, this is still a team that has a ton of flaws. And there is still something that's not right about this mix of players and mentalities. And, we could have great moments like this, and hopefully there will be more. But there are still real issues with this team.
Let me double down on that. Nick Kyprios on his podcast is there with Doug McClain, and he's alleging that there's a separation in the room between the vets and the younger players, as the younger players resent how the vets get too much of a pass from the coaches. That also was something that could have been written a couple of years ago. So, whatever, I think Nick is pretty good sources. So kind of sounds like we're covering the same territory from a different source.
Yeah. I mean, back in 2018, we were talking about the fact that the organization's shift in methodology away from being a family, away from caring about their season ticket holders, the way that Hextall kind of killed off a lot of the relations with alumni. All that stuff was noticed. It was noticed by players around the league. The team not getting in on free agents got noticed by, preeminent free agents, on the market. And that is still something that multiple people in and around the organization have said has dogged this organization for the last couple of years. And so there are legitimate concerns, not only about the locker room divide that might exist. And last year, because there might be people who would sit and say, well, then it didn't stop them last year. Why were they so much better last year? Well, because winning cures a lot of things, right? You don't necessarily show your true colors when you're winning. But when things start to turn and when things start to fall apart and you start to get a little bit nasty, you start to get just a little bit frustrated with these young guys for making a lot of same mistakes. When you're a young guy and you're saying, hey, how are you coming at me for not hustling back into the zone when you're out for a Sunday skate? Those kind of things are going to rear their ugly heads a lot when you're losing games and when you keep losing games the same way. And so I think Kyprios has been saying a lot of the same sort of stuff that we've been saying for a couple of years on our show. And it's not nothing. I'm sure that we will talk about the defense at some point, but the fact is that free agents do not view this as a destination like they used to. And so when you do a macro view of this team and think about how do you fix it? Because I don't know, can you really fix it at the deadline? Probably not. You're probably looking into the offseason. I don't see a major star player opting to come here. We can talk about that at some point.
Yeah,
I don't.
Yeah. I mean, we're heading toward some conclusions here, but there is some ground. I just want to set the groundwork. Chef?
I remember I was on radio 5 years ago, and I had stressed how important rah-rah guys are in a locker room. And I was kind of laughed at and stuff like that. But you look at and I really do honestly feel, I think that's why it was so emotional, and I'm going to tie Sam into this a little bit too, is because we haven't seen that in years with this team, 4 years with this team. I mean, when I go back to how the vets used to tutor the young kids, like what G lived with Briere. Remember, you don't see that relationship. I can't look down the lineup and see that relationship between any of the vets and any of the kids anymore, like we did in the first part of this decade when you actually saw it.
Can I interrupt you really quick?
Go ahead.
Chuck Fletcher finally comes out and talks to the media, and one of the least talked about things that he said was that some guys are struggling with this whole situation in the world more than other guys. He's very clear. I mean, like he pretty much had like a neon sign pointing with Carter Hart's name, but he kept saying young single guys on this team are struggling more. And so my head immediately goes to, then why aren't the vets doing something about it? And I had the same thought. Briere took guys in. He took some of the younger players in. Now, granted, I believe he was going through a divorce at the time, and so he was kind of like living the bachelor lifestyle. But like, that's not unheard of. And then I asked Brian Elliott and Claude Giroux after, it was 2 games ago, I asked them about what Chuck said. Giroux didn't really seem to want to answer it. Brian Elliott more or less said that, like, he didn't want to say that, like, there are, like, massive mental issues going on with these guys, but he said, like, it is our responsibility as vets to make sure that these guys are okay. And he kind of gave, like, a longer answer about it. But, like, to me, that was kind of an acknowledgement without saying, like, yeah, our guys are, you don't want to say, like, they're mentally soft or that, like, our guys are depressed. He gave, like, a more diplomatic, fatherly answer because he's the elder statesman on the team. But, like, to me, that's a real issue. And the fact that that the isolation, if that's, like, what the idea here is that, like, these guys are going home. They don't have a family to go back home to. They're living on their own, and they're not allowed to go anywhere because if they get COVID and they derail the season, they're going to feel awful. Why does it sound like nobody is either reaching out to or is more or less forcing the issue to get these guys to feel more like they're part of a family, even if it's not their biological family, a family with the team?
Exactly.
Like, that's upsetting to me. And I'm assuming, based on what you're saying, it's upsetting to you as well.
Yeah, I mean, speaking from a professional standpoint, like as a chef over the years, I have had probably close to 100 to 150 apprentices, let's say. And I've prided myself on the fact that I could count back, and out of those kids that came working for me, 60 of them, like at least 60 of them went on to be chefs themselves or sous chefs or something. 5 of them actually have their own business, which I take a lot of great pride in. And I still talk to them to this day. And the funny thing about it is, when you deal with these young kids, it's not like all they need is a little nudge. All they need is a little encouragement. And I always said, I was the hardest working guy in my kitchen. I think anybody that worked with me over the years will tell you that. And I think from the vet standpoint, they have to be the hardest. The G, Dvorak, Kevin Hayes, and Coots. I mean, you could see it with Coots more than the other vets, but he's hustling out there. When you see those guys lollygagging, skating around the ice and not like really aggressively doing the forecheck, then you saw it rubbing off. Look they broke TK this season. I mean, he at the end of last season, he was up on his skates and he was forechecking and he was creating turnovers. The only one that seems to be self-motivating out of these youth is Farabee. And I don't know if it's because he's playing, on a great line or whatever, but he still seems to be there. He made himself valuable on the penalty kill, and now he's on the power play at times. So, I mean, from that perspective, that's why I'm frustrated, because I know that if you plant a seed with a young kid and you nurture them, you can really get some great dividends from it.
Yep, absolutely. Dan?
Yeah, so my question for Russ is, obviously, a team loses 9-8 two to the same team. There's clearly problems. Like, this doesn't happen to other teams. There's clearly something. And you know, the point you made and that Nick Caprios kind of talked about, not the same points, but sort of in this same vein, that there's kind of like an issue with, you know, with the vets or you know, whatever it is. My question is Chuck Fletcher like aware of these problems? And let's just say, for example, that player A is a big problem, and you know, he's not handling younger players well, and blah blah blah. The bottom line is, like, does Chuck Fletcher know that these issues exist, and is he going to be trying to remedy them?
This is like the ultimate catch-22, because this is like one of the 7 different things that Fletcher's going through that he's in a no-win situation with. Because if he's aware of them and hasn't done anything to eliminate the problem, then he's in a way kind of aiding and abetting it. And if he is not aware, then he's committing organizational malpractice. So I have to think that at this point he's aware, right? Like, unless Kiprios is wrong, unless the things that have come out in some interactions back when the locker room was open are wrong. If all of that is wrong, then there's no issue. But it stands to reason that when, and this maybe is another topic altogether, but when you're on your third coach as a core group who has either gone to or won a Stanley Cup, and it appears that a team has either quit or continues to make the same stupid mistakes game in and game out, a team is unable to be consistent game in and game out, that speaks to a culture that has existed independent of those 3 Stanley Cup coaches, and has also like stood the test of time with a front office that has had turnover during their tenure as well. So at some point you have to look at the players, you have to look at the core on this team, and even the most loyal defenders of the core have to say something's not right.
No, I mean, really, like you spoke about Jake earlier, talking about how they panic, and they've never done anything. I mean, what if they won 2 playoff series since 2012? I mean, if you compare that with the retool on the fly like they did in Boston, well, those guys knew they had, they walked that aisle, they ran that mile, they won the cup, and when they kept some guys in LA to influence the culture of their rebuild, I mean, you have something to fall back on. When a guy tells you to do something, or a vet, has a certain manner about him, you look at him as a young player and say, hey, those guys won a couple of cups. They know what they're talking about. They're the voice of experience. The Flyers have none of that. I mean, to me, this is the elephant in the room. People get all upset and attached to players. I've been following this team over 50 years. Sometimes it just doesn't work out. There's no good guy. There's no bad guy. It's just a bad mix. And I think, again, going back to the theme I was talking about since 2014, wow, some things are the same and they have to change. And now is that time that Fletcher has to look at this and say, hey, you know what? These guys aren't gonna make it. And with the expansion and with the rest of this year, my feeling, Russ, is he should go about putting his own imprint on this team and retooling them and getting some of these guys out of here and bringing in some other veterans who could support some of these emerging kids, some guys who've won something, who won't panic under pressure.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. There are 2 issues, right? Here's the thing that I think people should now be cognizant of and maybe even be fearful of. We right now are in a period where people wanted to believe that this team was going to contend for a Stanley Cup. People have wanted to believe for the last few years that this team was just a few pieces away from contending for a Stanley Cup. And we have to face the realistic possibility that this past, say, 7 or 8 seasons is like 20 years from now, we might look back on this period, this Claude Giroux-led period, the same way that Sixers fans look back at Allen Iverson, a guy who a lot of teammates liked or respected, teams that didn't necessarily put the requisite talent around their captain or their best player for large stretches, that had made questionable coaching hires, that had questionable front office decision makers, and who ultimately never really contended, who might have made a Stanley Cup final or an NBA final, but never got back. And like that to me is, I think, the biggest shame, because if you're a huge Claude Giroux fan, the likelihood of this thing turning around while he has any value to the team is so minuscule. He has 1 year left on a contract after this season at just under $8.3 million. What does that next deal look like? Does Chuck Fletcher feel like he has to give a legacy deal? Do you want him to give him a legacy deal at 35 years old? I sure wouldn't. I wouldn't feel good about that. Because if the idea here is that you need to do this turnover, that you need to make this change, I don't see Claude Giroux waiving his no movement clause. I don't see many teams lining up for an $8.3 million cap hit in another flat cap season. And I agree with you that conceptually it would be great to clear out some money to start turning that page. Because like this is the other thing. People look at what last year was. They really bought into the fake first seed. And it was fun. It was enjoyable. But like the postseason last year showed that there were flaws. There wasn't enough turnover done. There wasn't enough changes made. The biggest hole on the roster was never filled. And the likelihood of them turning this thing around in a year to being a Stanley Cup contender when no major free agent wants to come here or even give this organization a look, it doesn't line up. The problem is the money. The problem is the money on Jake Voracek's contract. You can leave him exposed to Seattle. What on God's green earth is going to make Seattle want to go and get a guy for $8.25 million with 3 years left on that contract, a guy who blocks people on Twitter more than he puts up points on the score sheet? Like, who else? James Van Riemsdyk's having an excellent season. He's more valuable than he's ever going to be. And that $7 million cap hit, when Fletcher said in his press conference that teams don't want to take on term or dollars, who do you think he's talking about? It's either James Van Riemsdyk or Shane Gostisbehere.
Yep.
Teams don't want to take on salary. So the question you have to ask yourself is, how comfortable are you with Chuck Fletcher in an effort to blow this thing up, attaching valuable prospects and or draft assets just to get out from under these deals? Because that realistically is where this might have to head if, and that's also assuming a ridiculous if, Dave Scott and Comcast decide that they're okay to oversee a teardown, which I can pretty much assure you they're not. So negativity over here, but like unfortunately realistic negativity.
Well, it's hard to argue, Jeff.
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate, like, at some point you just want Chuck to do something. I mean, yeah, everybody blast the bad moves that were made when Homer did it with his GM. But I also remember how fun and exciting his teams were. And, you know, you got to see postseason a lot more than we ever have in the last 10 years. And, I mean, to even stress that more, I'll take a Chuck Fletcher mistake trade right now just to see something happening to show that there's that okay, I guess what I'm trying to say is I want to see a move that says I'm not afraid of the veterans on this roster, and I'll make moves if I have to.
Yeah, I mean, so Russ, one thing you just said I wanted to ask you about. You said, you know, you're not sure if like Dave Scott and the powers that be would authorize a teardown, but here's my question. If this team doesn't make the playoffs, like what exactly are you tearing down from? Like if I'm Dave Scott and these Comcast guys who, let's just for argument's sake say, you know, they don't know a ton about hockey. They know you either make the playoffs, you don't make the playoffs, whatever. Like if this team doesn't make the playoffs and you say that you're not sure they'd authorize a teardown, what does that even mean? Because if I'm them, to me, if they don't make the playoffs, then what exactly are you tearing down?
Well, because you're looking at it from somebody who understands hockey, and Dave Scott does not understand hockey. Dave Scott wanted James Van Riemsdyk because he knew James Van Riemsdyk's name. That's why James Van Riemsdyk is on this team. It's not because he was a great fit. It was because that was a name that Dave Scott knew, and that was a guy who would actually consider coming back to Philadelphia. That's why he's here. And so Why is Elaine Vigneault here? He was probably the best coach on the market, right? But also because he has a name. There's name value. Why is Chuck Fletcher here? That honestly is that is the great question. Why is Chuck Fletcher here? Because Chuck Fletcher was an established GM, and he was a guy who was a safe pick. Do you know who somebody was that had an interview, even if it wasn't even that serious of an interview here for Chuck Fletcher's job? Bill Zito.
Yeah.
I was just going to say Bill Zito.
You know who's a really good outside-the-box thinker who could turn an organization around? Bill Zito. If Dave Scott were Ed Snyder or were any GM worth their weight in gold, Bill Zito would be the GM. And we wouldn't be having a lot of these conversations because, quite frankly, I think he probably would have made better moves. He might have even been a better evaluator of talent. See, here's the real crux of the issue. The Flyers have not done a good job of evaluating their own young talent. And that maybe more than anything is like the biggest indictment on, if you want to say it was Hextall and Fletcher, just Hextall, just Fletcher, however you want to go about it. Somebody in this organization made the determination that this team was ready, that this team with Phil Myers and Travis Sanheim were ready to take the next step. That Ivan Provorov was ready to take the next step without a steady a steady veteran next to him. That Carter Hart was going to be put in an advantageous position to continue to take the next step. That Oscar Lindblom was going to bounce back. That Nolan Patrick was going to be something better than a 4C. Like, somebody's evaluations here weren't good, and that needs to be, a real topic of conversation. As for Dave Scott, I think he is of the mentality, and I would guess that a number of the people high up in this organization are of the mentality that at least if you have star players that you can market, not that they do that well, but if you have star players on this team and you have some kind of name recognition, you can draw fans out. One of the biggest reasons that Ron Hextall was gone is because they were losing gate revenue because the team was bad and nobody was coming to the arena. They were losing out on parking. They were losing out on concessions. They were losing out on pro shop purchases. So I don't see a scenario where Dave Scott says, yeah, we're going to tear this down for 2 years and go back to that, because that expedited this whole process to put them in the position they are now. That's why.
But that's what they're going to be in now, because I know a lot of people who have dropped their season tickets. If they don't make the playoffs, is your thought process that people are going to keep going if this team doesn't make the playoffs and the death spiral continues? I mean,
I think Dave Scott's thought process is exactly that. I don't. I mean, we've had, I don't know how many different season ticket holders over the last couple of years tell us that they've bailed on it. They hated how the secondary market kind of undercut the value of their tickets. They were never able to resell their tickets. We know that people are being comped tickets right now. The teams set ridiculous prices on these pandemic tickets right now. There are so many different ways that we could go with this, but the sad reality is Dave Scott, as the owner of this team, has not shown it at any point that he understands the game beyond a few big names or established names. And it doesn't mean that he has to. It doesn't mean that in order for you to compete for a championship in your respective sport, your owner has to be as knowledgeable inside and out as your front office or as your fans. But when that dictates some of the decision making that you've made as an owner, that is incredibly problematic. And it's kind of rearing its head now, especially now that this team is whatever they are right now.
Well, one quick thing I just want to say real quick is I do think it's kind of hindsight is 2020 saying that how ridiculous it is that some people thought that, some of the young guys are ready to take this next step. Because I think that Carter Hart was terrific last year. Anyone who would have predicted that he would have an 880 save percentage by now, no one was going to predict that. Phil Myers and Travis Sanheim were very good last year for long stretches. To be somewhat fair, I didn't see too many people before the season saying that these guys were going to be this bad. So I think I think criticizing people for not knowing that Carter Hart was going to have an 880 save percentage is a little over the top.
So I will go back to something that I said back in October on this show. I said that If this team didn't fill the Matt Niskanen void, I couldn't view them as a real contender. I couldn't view them as a top 2 or top 3 team in the conference. I said that if they don't fill that hole, and they would go with what many people assumed would be the case, which is Phil Myers up on that top pair. I said something to the effect of, what happens if Phil Myers struggles 5 games into the season and Ivan Provorov ends up having to babysit his partner instead of being able to play his own game like he was able to next to Niskanen? And the last question that I asked was, if Carter Hart can't rely on his top pair, what do you think is going to happen to his development? Like, people don't like to think about the cascading effect that one guy can have. And Chuck Fletcher, said recently that, the variance in goals allowed between last season and this season isn't just on one guy. And I totally agree with that. But the failure to address that has done so much in terms of speeding up what is either the plateauing or regression of a lot of young players on this team. And so I viewed this team when they were in training camp. I said, I like a lot of what I see. I thought that Sanheim and Myers would probably bounce back. I said it, I don't know how many times. So I can't sit here and say that I didn't think that they were going to be a solid pair. I said pretty much from the time that Matt Niskanen retired that was going to have really negative ramifications if they didn't fill that void, and they didn't. The idea that Carter was going to regress like he has, no. I think you're totally right. It would be totally unfair to say that Carter Hart was going to have, this massive step back. But a lot of the things that happened in front of him and the failure to fill that hole, I think just compounded a lot of issues. So I think that the blind optimism that this team was a quote unquote top seed last season in the postseason, that never made sense. I absolutely shredded people who had that notion. I will not apologize for that because it's kind of played out here. This team had issues. They had issues in the postseason. Once they got out of that the round robin, it was pretty clear that they had some issues, and they didn't address them. I'm not saying that that's all on the players either. I think that a lot of that falls on the front office for not addressing those problems. And maybe you could put some of it on the coaches, but at some point, let me throw it to Chef. If your ingredients suck, if your ingredients aren't cohesive, you can't make a good meal. It doesn't matter how talented you are.
That is true. Now I'll ask you this too. It wasn't, apparently, from what I've read, and maybe you can clarify, that it wasn't a surprise. Apparently, they notified in the bubble that he wasn't going to be coming back. And it kind of waited till free agency, was it free agent? Yeah, to rear its ugly head that he was going to stay retired. They thought that possibly they could talk him out of it. Now, how bad of a move is that to not have a backup plan in place? And to their credit, the backup plan of Braun and Haig getting re-signed was not a backup plan at all. So I guess, was Chuck's hands tied that he did what he could do at the very last minute? But what is your feelings of that?
Well, let me just interject. Chef, you're ignoring Eric Gustafson here, okay? Have some respect.
Yes, I am. And I most definitely am ignoring Gustafson. Okay, Shane.
Guys, he's been advertised. Come on.
Yeah, that's true. Shane negative 2.0. Okay, so that's fine.
Let's not forget that Chuck said when they first signed Gustafson that not only did he think that Gustafson and Gostisbehere could be in the same lineup, but they were talented enough to play with each other as a pairing. So let's not forget that. Okay. What was the question, or what was right before that? Because I just totally lost my train of thought.
I was saying Gustafson. That
Gustafson will do that to you.
Yeah, that's true.
Niskanen.
Yeah, Niskanen.
So, how many of you have been through a bad breakup in your life where you were not the one to make the call?
Every girl ever.
So, Chuck to me was the guy who got dumped and wanted to believe that she'd be back and was going to hold on as long as he could until that relationship was ended for good. And that to me is what this was. I think he really was holding out hope. Niskanen told him when the bubble was done. Mm-hmm. He was driving home and he said, I'm out. I'm done. And in fairness, a lot of vets across the league contemplated retirement, especially with not knowing what this season was going to look like. Nobody wanted to go back in the bubble. I mean, Provorov didn't care because he's a beast and he just loves hockey. He like eats, breathes, sleeps hockey. But like everybody else, like nobody really wanted to go back in the bubble. But like Niskanen told Fletcher at the end of at the end of their run, I'm retiring. Fletcher held out. Now here's one thing that is knowledge. The Flyers wanted to get on Alex Pietrangelo. They were all in on the concept. That I think was their plan. I think that was going to be, whether or not Niskanen was eventually going to change his mind or not. They wanted to get in on Pietrangelo. The problem is that Pietrangelo, like pretty much every other big ticket free agent the last few years, had no interest in even taking a meeting here. None. And when I say like no interest, I mean like of the teams that he had a list, they were not on it. And even if they had forced the issue, he did not want to come here. He did not even want to have an initial meeting with the team. And you think back to like those Holmgren years, you think back to the Bobby Clark years, you think about any time before that. And Kypreos said this. This is why like that quote was going around. We put it on the Snow the Goalie account like from back in 2018, I think it was 2019, that like the notion that like this team doesn't get in on the big ticket free agents, like that's almost a slap in the face. That's insane. But Pietrangelo didn't want to come here. So he was effectively off the board. Torrey Krug signed before Niskanen, apparently the second and final time said, I'm not coming back. Krug was a guy that I would have been interested in, but $6 million is still a lot for, like he certainly would have been an improvement to this top four, but I don't know. Like flat cap again kind of comes into play. Are you happy with $6 million? And then it's like, what else was left after that? Like, I can tell you that's
Nate Schmidt was like when they
did not want to take.
When they acquired Pietrangelo, they had to get rid of a defenseman. And I'm not saying he's as good as Pietrangelo, of course not. But Nate Schmidt is very comparable, not this season, but in the past had been comparable to somebody like Niskanen, even though he's left-handed,
sure.
He plays right defense. But he had a no trade clause. Maybe the Flyers are in on that, and he said no. I don't know.
Yeah, I honestly do not know. I've never inquired about the organization's interest or potential mutual interest with Nate Schmidt, who still has 5 seasons left on his deal?
4, yeah,
for just under $6 million, like just under $6 million per, I believe. So, again, like when you zoom out on this too, like would you have been happy with Nate Schmidt for that many years at $6 million? Like I don't know how many people would have been, but if you're thinking about what makes you a better team this year. He hasn't had a great year, but like historically probably would have been a safer bet than, having to roll the dice on Gostisbehere on your top pair or Justin Braun on your top pair. So it's problematic, and it's problematic on a few different levels. And like the other thing that I keep coming back to is like, all right, so let's just say that this place is a place that free agents don't want to come because they haven't made a major free agent signing in quite a while. And for those who might be like yelling right now, what about Kevin Hayes? Remember, they had to acquire his rights and convince him to come here and pay him an exorbitant contract just to get him to sign here. You can't be an organization that touts your prospects, that touts your young roster players and touts your draft assets and then not be able to make a deal. Like that to me is the thing that like even when Chuck Fletcher came out a few days ago and met with the media and did his whole like I'm calling everybody but barely anybody's calling back. I find it just inconceivable that if you knew that you needed a top 4 defenseman or a top pair defenseman, right? There are teams in this league who could eat some cap that are bad teams that could eat some cap and would love to add to their draft assets and to young talent that are going to fit within a window, however many years down the line, to be at least a playoff team. Like, I just cannot conceptualize the idea that, like, this team doesn't have enough, trade assets to get a deal done. I just can't. I cannot wrap my head around that.
Give me one. What would you do? And since you just brought it up, the assets and all that, and there's people out there that have, room and people that could do us some good. What would you suggest then?
It's like I look at it as, what is Morgan Frost right now? Like how valuable is Morgan Frost to your organization? because you also have to kind of do the calculus on like what's Nolan Patrick going to be. Is he a guy that like I don't know what the next deal looks like, and I also don't know like is a team from maybe the Western Conference going to want to try to bring him closer to home and hope that like he rediscovers whatever he's supposed to be. But like Morgan Frost is a guy. Does Isaac Ratcliffe have any value to anybody? Does Cam York have value? Do we think that Cam York is actually going to come up to the NHL level in the next 2 years and is going to be a top pair defenseman? Is he going to be a second pair defenseman? Where does Phil Myers fit into this team? Where does Travis Sanheim fit into this team? You have a number of picks that you could trade. Like, it just seems inconceivable with all of those things considered that you can't get a deal done. And like, heck, even if it was that Nate Schmidt deal, right? Again, we don't know. We don't know if he would have been open to a deal to Philly. Was it something they kicked the tires on? Who knows? It just seems when you just kind of like make the list of assets in this organization and like things that have been touted and players that have been touted and young guys on this roster that have been touted, you take into account what the expansion draft is going to look like and who you're theoretically protecting against and who you might have to cut a side deal with so that Seattle doesn't take them. There are so many things that are supposedly valuable that if you sweeten the pot enough, it just seems like cognitively dissonant to say we have all these things, but no GM wants them. Does that make sense?
You make perfect sense. I just want to add 2 points, and Dan, then we'll go to you. It was just about 3 months ago that Elliot Friedman was on Sportsnet talking about how the Flyers have a lot of young players that the league wants that get asked about that Chuck Fletcher's fielding calls on. Not that he was offering them out there at that particular juncture, but the Flyers have a lot of players that other teams want. Now remember that. So that speaks to your point. And then it brings me back to what happened last expansion when Chuck Fletcher lost a player like Alex Tuck. And he obviously must have felt burned by that. And I think there could be some of that at work in his hesitancy to make those deals because he doesn't want to look at that player on another team and see them thriving at a position that the Flyers still need help on. But, I mean, nothing ventured, nothing gained. You have to take a risk.
Yeah, I mean, what I would do is, and I, sort of purported variations of this out there, but like I would trade, I really like Morgan Frost. If it depends on if you think that you can transform this team into something that could win a cup in the next few years, right? If you don't, and you want to try and tear it down, well, then whatever, these conversations are kind of pointless. But if you do, what I'm looking to do is I'm looking to trade a high pick and a good prospect in something where you've maybe got to give away some salary also, and you get back a defenseman like an Ekholm or an Ellis. And then I'd be looking to move Travis Sanheim to, my dream is trade Sanheim to the Red Wings and get a guy like a Tyler Bertuzzi back. Like basically what I want to do with these moves is I want to make sure that you get a top pairing defenseman. I then like to ship off Sanheim because I think he does have some value and you're not going to be able to protect more than 3 defensemen. So if you get the guy from Nashville or wherever else, you can't protect him. So I'd ship off Sanheim to try and add some kind of nastiness combined with scoring ability in the, in your middle 6 forwards. That's kind of like what I would be looking to do. And if there's any possible way to get someone to take Voracek, as difficult as that may seem, that's what I would be looking to do. But that would be me. I'd trade for a top pairing defenseman. I'd move Sanheim to try and add some toughness and scoring in the middle 6.
I love it conceptually. I don't know who would disagree with it. The Ellis thing is interesting. Like the Ellis thing also kind of goes back to a Fletcher quote from his presser where like he talked about if we can do something that addresses the now and the future. Well, Ellis has, I think, 5 more seasons left on his deal beyond this one at $6.25 million per season. He's 30. He kind of fits the role of the steady defenseman that could pair with Ivan Provorov, that can take a lot of pressure off of the Myers and Sanheims of the world. I think you're right that Sanheim has value. I think if you're going to move him, though, you better be sure that Phil Myers is better than what he's shown this year, because otherwise you're creating potentially another hole. The Voracek contract to me is the worst one on the team, and I don't think it's particularly close. I have to think that at some point there might be a chance that a team, if the Flyers continue to fall out of this, I have to think that like the Van Riemsdyk contract is movable. I just have to. I have to think that there is a team right now that might want to look at this over the next 2 years. Are we going to be a playoff team? Does this get us, to break into the playoff picture? And I have to think that like they can get something for James Van Riemsdyk, even if it really only amounts to, cap relief. The Voracek contract, like of all the things that are on the table, like when you think about like how do you vastly improve this team's outlook, it's to get that deal off the books. Like I said, like however long ago, Giroux has 1 season left, and he's got the no movement clause, and God knows what the next deal will look like. I don't think he's going to like want to sign somewhere else. I do wonder if the team is going to say, listen, man, like you're not worth that anymore. But like he's a prideful guy. Like I don't know how that negotiation plays out. But like to me, the Voracek contract is just so massive. Like, can anybody make sense of why Seattle would do it?
You'd have to attach a prospect.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because like that tends to be like the thing that people say, well, you would leave either Van Riemsdyk or Voracek exposed to Seattle. Van Riemsdyk I can maybe make a case for, just because like as a power play body, and a guy who can light the lamp, like, okay, like he's shown this year that he's not dead. But Voracek, like
they're not going to take Voracek unless
there are no, like
pot.
what team is banging down the door? You know what I mean? And like that, honestly, I think more than anything is like that should be kind of an anecdote that people can look at and realize like just how bad things are with the cap situation here, because you've got, what is it? 23 million, 24 million tied up between Voracek, Giroux, and Van Riemsdyk.
Yep.
And when you think about like what this team is and how long it might take to turn this around, none of those guys are going to be anywhere near the player they are right now in 2 years. So you want to talk about diminishing returns on your initial investment. Like these guys are going to just be, the 3 pictures next to it in the dictionary.
The Couturier contract is going to be really interesting because here's a guy who probably should be making twice as what he's making right now. He's also a guy that's been having increasing issues with his lower body, and his contract's up at the end of next season. Like that's going to be here sooner than we know it. And what is this team going to do out of it? And I think the fact that Carter Hart's been so bad this year kind of helps the team out in one way, in that his first real contract is probably not going to be that huge this offseason. But but the Couturier thing that's going to be another one, man. What are they going to do there?
Well, you're 100% spot on with that. There are other guys on this team that, like, if Fletcher decides that this team is out, like they are out of the running, or that making the postseason is something that's not going to be as much of a priority, and then like I look at Scott Lawton, who I like a lot, but like, can you get anything back for Scott Lawton, because he's not coming back after this season? Michael Raffl, like I don't think any team's going to trade anything of value for Michael Raffl, but like Michael Raffl won't be back. Like that's the other thing that you kind of have to start to look forward to is, what are some of the impending UFAs going to look like? And you're right, the Couturier deal is like so tough, because I like conceptually could we agree that like if there's a guy who is a proven veteran who would have massive appeal on the trade market, that like Sean Couturier might be the most valuable guy that you could theoretically trade? I mean, I would say so. Yeah. But if you make that move, if you pull the trigger on that, you're saying to the fan base, we are out. We'll see you in like 2025. And I see no way that Dave Scott does that.
Oh, yeah,
No.
I mean, you'd have to come out with a letter like the Rangers did, when you make that deal, because we are rebuilding. There will be pain, but stay tuned. We're going to make moves. I just don't see it. Russ, we've kind of missed the elephant in the room. Although those contracts like Voracek's and thing, there's so many issues here. But how do we fix Carter Hart? That's one question. Does he need to go to the minors? Was he rushed? Let's take some perspective, the long view now. He only had 18 games in the AHL, or is he just going through a bad time behind a lousy defense?
I mean, he's put in a position where he was set up to fail from day one. I can tell you that like there are a few things that are concerning. What's the name of the coach that he worked with in the offseason that also works with Tristan
Dustin Schwartz.
That one. They tried to implement some changes, and they obviously have not worked. There was a desire to get Carter's glove hand a little bit higher. There was, I think Carter even said before the season that he was going to come out and challenge. He was going to challenge forwards to try to cut down angles to make himself bigger. And what we've seen consistently this season is that his angles are at least slightly off and that he's kind of sitting back in his net. So he's doing the antithesis of what he said he was going to do. And maybe more than anything, and it's been exacerbated by the fact that this team had to take time off because of the COVID list issues they were having, is that like there's been no time to practice. So all of these changes that they've been trying to make with Carter Hart, that were, attempted to be implemented in the off season, whatever you want to call that period of time, and then coming back and then seeing him struggle. And then what I'm sure, Dillabaw's been trying to work with him on, like, there's just no time. There's no practice time to work on this. You're not going to send him down. I mean, at least early in the season, you weren't going to send him down to the A. And in fairness, like, it wasn't even like the AHL was, up and running when the season started. So like, I don't know how you fix it. The only reason that you send him down, okay, like if you're looking for real confirmation that the organization thinks that there's something rotten in the locker room, is Carter Hart gets sent down. Because aside from that, there is no reason, none, that he should be down in the A. If anything, maybe he goes onto the taxi squad where he's given a week off, where it's him and Dillabaugh nonstop, working on technique, working on trying to correct his muscle memory, and like film everything, clear his head for a week.
I'd be down with that.
Like, and honestly, like that probably wouldn't hurt. But if you're gonna say, like, you think about how even keel this kid has been. He's been seeing a sports psychologist since he was a teen. And then like you think about, we saw when he broke the stick early in the season. We saw the press conference like a week and a half ago where he was absolutely dejected and talked about like the fact that he needs to get back to what made him successful. And he sounded lost. He sounded heartbroken that like he was letting his team down like he was, or maybe it was the other way around. To me, if you send him down after you've anointed him the chosen one, after fans, some fans, not all, but some fans, said that he was a dark horse Vezina candidate, when you've had all of those expectations, and everybody knows how the expectations are on goalies in Philadelphia, and then you send him down to the Phantoms, maybe as an organization you say, hey, him getting some games in, getting his confidence, implementing these techniques against teams that don't matter, against less skilled players, maybe there's a confidence thing. And if he goes down and he tears it up and they bring him right back up, all right, then cool. Maybe that's what it was. But I don't see it, because if you do that, like you are more or less saying, we don't believe in you right now. We don't believe that you have the ability to fix this season. And like that to me is a real problem. Like I worry that like you break the kid, or you really break his spirit, you break his confidence, and then you're potentially putting him in a really bad spot. Especially given the fact that like Fletcher pretty much said that he's been struggling throughout COVID. So through the pandemic. Right. Yeah. And then, I mean, he's really the most important player on the team going forward. So they have to make the right decision with him. We're going to wrap, but Chef, you got one for Russ?
Yeah. I just was curious. What's the whole buyout situation being in a flat cap? I mean, what do we got? We still got McDonald and Schlemko on the end of that, I think. But is there any chance that maybe you could do something with Jake and a buyout?
No,
I don't
No,
I don't know how that
ungodly
benefits you.
expensive.
If you buy out Jake, you're paying him for the next 8 years. If you look at it, it's a complete disaster.
Yeah.
He makes too much, and he has too much term left to buy him out.
Yeah, you can go to Cap Friendly and you'll watch that disaster unfold right before your eyes. You know, like, nope, not happening.
Yeah, I understand why you would ask it. It's just that they're like, that's why I said I think it's the worst contract they have, because there is no, there's no easy way out, and your only way out, if like that's the way to go, is pretty much like death by 1,000 cuts. So yeah, it's just not a tenable situation.
Yeah. Russ, before we let you go, I just wanted to try and run one more thing by you. There was a tweet thread by Bill Meltzer who compared the Flyers' current plight with 06-07, where Holmgren comes in and they did some buying, they did some selling, and the overall message was, we're making this thing over. And in a way, it helped the team when you had a guy like Scott Upshaw coming here, and you knew they were going to be players in free agency. Now, while the Flyers aren't going to be as much in that regard, with all the young talent they do have, it just feels like if they had a different, maybe a little bit of a different support cast, that type of approach is the one that makes most amount of sense to me if they could do it. Because in a way, it's kind of like a retool, because, you know, the 84-85 Flyers kind of came out of nowhere with a lot of young players, and they traded Darryl Sittler right before the season started to get Murray Craven. And yeah, I mean, history doesn't have to repeat itself, but it's not implausible that if you lower expectations by saying, hey, we're going to retool this thing and bring in some other support players, it could be like 07-08. It maybe could have that feel, and also give some of the young guys that they're going to move forward with, they're going to be here, a shot in the arm.
It would be nice. The flat cap is like the ultimate elephant in the room. Like that to me is the thing that stops all of this. Like it's the thing that makes so much of this harder than what Holmgren had to do. And I guess like here's the other problem. Like when you think back to 06-07 and some of the moves they were able to make, they were also that was the Timonen year, right? That was Timonen and Hartnell.
Well, yeah, that was the year before. That's right. When they fired.
That was the year before.
Right. 07-08 is like that offseason. After that offseason, they went and made the trade to get Timonen and Hartnell, and then they signed Danny Briere. But they also already had traded for Upshaw and Coburn. So they traded a guy like Alexei Zhitnik. And in other words, they're turning over a new leaf. And I think the fans need to see that. And the team responded as well.
Yeah, is it what would be best for the organization? Yes. Is it feasible? I don't know. That to me, like we could trade out a lot of the secondary and tertiary pieces of this team, but ultimately it's the top earning guys on the team that, like, if you're looking for a culture change or a culture shock, it has to happen there. And like if you look at Cap Friendly and you even look ahead to next year and you try to figure out like where does a Jake Voracek land? Where does James Van Riemsdyk land? And if you have no intention of making a remotely, similar offer to Claude Giroux, is like going to him with a year left on the deal and say, listen, man, like this is where we're at. When this upcoming season is over, like the deal might be like $6 million a year. How are you feeling about it? Maybe, like, is that the thing that gets him to waive the no movement clause that he's been adamant about not waiving? Like maybe, I mean, if that's the case, then there you go. Like you need it for you to like really hit the reset on this. You have to move on from this core. The only guy who like is even somewhat like tangentially affiliated with the core, I guess, is Couturier. And like, is that the moment where you like Giroux waves and goes, which I don't think is going to happen. Voracek is somehow plucked by Seattle or sent elsewhere. Still don't see that happening. Van Riemsdyk is gone, possible. Gostisbehere is gone, possible. And then you hand the C to Couturier, like, okay, then maybe you're talking about like a real change in the organization. But if the idea is just to tinker with some of the fringe pieces, you're not going to see any change. This core has gone through, again, 3 coaches that have gone to or won a Stanley Cup. They've gone through 3 GMs at this point. Changing out small parts is like changing the hubcaps on your car when the engine and the transmission are giving clear signs that they're wearing out.
So we're going to see any of these kids like Lazinski, Allison pretty soon?
If they lose a few more here, then yeah, I think it would be pretty safe to assume that you might see some of the young guys get called up. Like I said, like I think that the guys that kind of make sense for them to move on from, like if you see them make a few small moves and it's like a Scott Lawton and a Michael Raffler sent out, pretty much just to clear space, that might make sense. If there's a guy who gets hurt and has something that like in a normal season, he would fight through or would come back from, and maybe they just kind of say, just hold off. Maybe you start to see those guys. I would expect like call-ups to the taxi squad. I would expect that like in some spot duty. I don't think that you're going to see, Lazinski and Allison playing every night. And I don't see them, playing like a 15 game stretch in a row. But I do think that they'll get a look because, again, like if the idea here is to try to figure out how you're going to supplement some of this roster next season and beyond with low cost young talent, and you want to get a feel for what you think you might actually have there, it makes all the sense in the world to give them a test run, especially at the end of the season if you're, out of the playoff hunt.
Yeah, absolutely.
But how's this for some positivity? Maybe Big Sam's moment, maybe Big Sam's goal was enough to galvanize the locker room. And they come out like absolute banshees for the next 2 weeks. And they stomp Boston and they stomp Washington and they take it to the Islanders. And like, we look at this and like mid-April and we say, man, they're back in the hunt. Then what? Wouldn't that be nice? Maybe not plausible, but wouldn't that be nice? By the way,
yeah,
with how consistently inconsistent this team is there anybody right now who would put their life savings on the fact that this team couldn't do that? Because it would be the most Flyers thing to ever happen.
Of course. But every move they make from here on out, in my mind, should be with the long term in mind, or at least the midterm in mind. I don't want any rentals or anything. It's a waste of time.
I agree. I think that's why you're seeing conceptually them moving to an Ellis instead of an Ekholm. Like if that's the way that they're going to end up making a deal, where they're going to go for a guy that has term, because it's not only for this year to try to stabilize in front of Hart, but it really is a longer play, which honestly isn't the worst thing for this team.
Well, no, I mean it to me, Provorov is really kind of more a Robin than a Batman. Well, like he can function on the first pair, but he still has not shown me that he can be the one who pulls the weight. So that position is like one of the top 4 or 5 on the whole team. So if you need to go and pay some extra to get him, it's going to be chaos until you do.
Yeah, and by the way, like I don't think that we can write him off as being that number one.
No, he's still young.
I thought he was about a year away from being able to do it. Like that's why I thought that like if nothing else, they would have made a deal for a guy with a year left on his contract or 2 years left on his contract to play alongside him. It just like that again, like the number one hole on the team, they opted not to fill and instead to sign a redundant Eric Gustafsson. Like if you need to point at one thing of why this season went the way that it did or has gone so far, it's that, and by the way, like Chuck said that, the money situation is rough, right? That the cap situation is rough. It didn't preclude him from signing a redundant player to a $3 million deal. Like in anybody's perfect lineup for this team, you're either going to have a $3 million scratch or a $4.5 million scratch. Like let that one sink in, and then like have somebody try to come back and say that this offseason was executed well.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, Russ, we're gonna wrap it there. I want to thank you so much for coming on. it's really rough. The last couple of times we've had you on, it's kind of a tough outlook. But like you said, the Flyers can just flip the switch, and you just have to watch and see what happens between now and April 12th, which is the trade deadline, and see if the team or their general manager can surprise us and start moving this thing in a positive direction.
I told myself after coming on in October, I was like, if I ever go back, I'm going to make sure that I'm much more positive. It's going to be a more enjoyable outlook for everybody listening. And there was a real missed opportunity here, guys. There was a long stretch where this team played well, and I have to be like one of the riders of the apocalypse or something, I guess.
Well, we'll get you on when they're in the middle of a winning streak, and we'll just all celebrate, and we'll toss a couple back when we're on the air here. So
I'd even take a 3-game winning streak. Like, that'd be fine. I'll hop on then. Well, let's not go for 10. 3 would be fine.
I'll take 2. They're playing Buffalo 2 straight games. So the only thing that bothers me with that, Buffalo's bound to win. They lost 17 straight? Or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah, the law of averages, right?
Yeah.
Oh, man. When I said in the offseason that Taylor Hall made the ultimate loser move by signing there, and people were like, you don't know his life, you don't know what he wants, you don't know what he's doing, you don't have the right to say that. Loser move. Ask him if he's happy that he took the money.
Yeah. It's insane. Yeah, lost 17 in a row. Just checking it. Unbelievable. They're 62 Mets. So anyway, where can people find you on social and your podcast and your writing?
Well, hit me up over on Twitter at JoyOnBroad. I'm also on Instagram at JoyOnBroad. I don't really post much over there, but we're over on Snow The Goalie on Twitter and Instagram. More stuff goes up there, of course, Facebook.com/Snow The Goalie. That's pretty much everywhere. You can feel free to tweet at me if you agree. That's great. If you disagree, I also like to have the kind of banter with people. I had a guy who's been like trying to go at me for 3 months or something like that, who's followed me and unfollowed me, I think no fewer than like 4 or 5 times a week, who I think was like ready to have me executed. And then during the Rangers game on Thursday, we were doing the press row show in between periods. And the guy was like, I really don't like a lot of what you say, but this is entertaining. And so then he followed me again. So, I mean, I guess I'm just saying I heal divides is really what this is. So,
well, if he says play Misty for me, look out, right?
Oh.
Russ, thanks so much. We'll catch up to you. We'll definitely get you back when things are going well, or if they make a great trade and we're all surprised.
If Chuck Fletcher makes a deal, I will come on this show and I will publicly renounce every negative thing I've ever said or written about him on crossingbroad.com.
Okay, fair enough. You got it, pal. You take care.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Russ. It's always fun, man.
Right.
Thanks, man.
Right. Take care.
Catch you later.
Okay, just before we wrap up here, just a reminder that the O&B Puckcast and FlyersNittyGritty.com is brought to you by Jim's South Street, right on 400 South Street in Philadelphia. 4 decades of some of the best cheesesteaks, hoagies, fries, you name it, that you could ever want in the grandest tradition of Philadelphia. And the great thing is, even if you can't get there, if you live near 400 South Street, you can use DoorDash and they'll deliver this delicious food right to your door. So remember, Jim's South Street, 400 South Street, right in Philadelphia. And Dan, I got to go to you after that one.
Oh, I know. I haven't eaten dinner yet. You're killing me. I actually just ordered something on. I just ordered something on Grubhub while we were wrapping up there because I'm so starving. But I wish I could get the Jim's cheesesteak down in DC.
Well, Chef made the offer, so you know.
Hey, whenever I go back that way, I'm bringing one.
Yep, exactly. Well, that'll be great. You can have a drink and.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So, Dan, any final statements before you give people your social media coordinates?
Well, I guess this team better beat Buffalo the next 2 games. It was just such a great moment with Sam Morin that this team's been so disappointing that at least that was a little shining light to occur. And we'll see what happens, there's a lot coming out. It seems like with the veterans and the young guys, and the rest of the season has the potential to be something real interesting, if not successful. But we shall see. In any event, folks can find me on Twitter at dsilver88. Throw me a follow, and you'll probably see some strong opinions, and you can argue with them if you want.
Fantastic. Chef, any final statement and your social media coordinates?
Just wait and see. I'll wait and see if they actually do anything, and I'll be happy if they do. At this point, like I said, I just want to see some signs of life in that front office. And you can find me at Chef de Left B on Twitter.
Fantastic. And of course, I'm Isaiah, ISAIAH _520. Isaiah. Don't forget the _520. And just to check the schedule, tomorrow night the Flyers play in Buffalo. Wednesday, again in Buffalo. And then again, they get a couple days off, could use that practice time. They're at the Island. They're also at Boston on Monday the 5th, so we're not sure when we'll be coming back. But either way, we'll hit you up. And remember, the trade deadline is Monday, 3 p.m., April 12th. So we will definitely be back to you probably by the 11th because they play on that day. And just one final reminder, you can follow the O&B Puckcast at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck. And if you could rate and subscribe to the podcast, it helps us move up the charts when people look up for Philadelphia Flyers podcast. And we also have a YouTube channel, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeart, and so many. One of our 12 or 13 different platforms. If you could check us out and subscribe. So until next time, everybody, good luck to the Flyers and mainly to Chuck Fletcher, and take care.